Committee will come to order. The United States faces the most dangerous security environment since World War II. China is rapidly expanding its military power. It can field advanced systems in a matter of months. By contrast, in the United States, it takes more than a decade to deliver needed new capability to our warfighters. By that time, the threat has changed, the cost has ballooned, and the solution is outdated. The reality is that our defense acquisition system is failing the American warfighter. That's not just my view. Nearly every combatant commander who's testified before this committee this year said the same. Moreover, defense companies of all sizes tell us they face a maze of red tape, bureaucratic delays, and a risk-averse culture at the department that deters innovation. This helps explain why the number of prime contractors in our country has dropped from 51 to now 6. Meanwhile, excessive regulations and fears of losing privately funded IP are driving away commercial firms and startups and making VCs think twice about investing in defense tech. And for those that do press ahead, too often the game-changing technologies languish in the notorious valley of death, never reaching full-scale production. The cumulative effect is a hollowed-out, uncompetitive defense industrial base. This is a national security emergency. If we're serious about achieving President Trump's peace through strength agenda, it's not enough to spend more. We have to make every dollar count. The reconciliation package that President Trump recently passed into law was a critical first step in restoring the level of investment that our defense industry needs. But even if we raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, as I've urged, it won't make a difference unless we fix this broken acquisition system. That's why, along with my good friend, the ranking member, introduced the Bipartisan SPEED Act, which is now the cornerstone of the FY26 NDA passed by this committee last week. The SPEED Act will cut through layers of red tape and deliver for the warfighter at a speed and scale. It accelerates the requirements process from nearly 3 years to as few as 90 days. It empowers program executive officers and gives them greater budget flexibility. It prioritizes commercial solutions and fosters an environment where innovation can flourish by removing barriers to entry and bridging the valley of death. It modernizes outdated and overly burdensome regulations that slow delivery and inflate costs. It promotes a data-as-a-service model that gives the department access to the technical data it needs to sustain its systems while preserving the intellectual capital of the American industry. It creates the Defense Industrial Resilience Consortium, bringing industry to the table to address challenges from supply chain fragility to restoring surge capacity. And most importantly, it drives much-needed cultural change. No more rewarding paper pushers or over problem solvers. The SPEED Act fosters a culture of agility and responsible risk-taking where failing fast and learning quickly is seen as progress, not as a career killer. Let's be honest, past reforms have failed. However, I believe this time is different. The White House, the Pentagon, Congress, and industry are all demanding change. I commend President Trump for calling on the department to urgently modernize defense acquisition and streamline overly burdensome regulations. Mr. Duffy, we want to hear from you on how the department is acting on that directive to deliver to the warfighter, and I look forward to discussing how we can align our efforts to fix the defense acquisition system and ensure the U.S. Armed Forces are the world's most lethal fighting force, or remain that way. And with that, I yield to my friend, the ranking member, for any opening comment he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks more than anything for your leadership on this issue. Acquisition reform is something we've been working on for a while. I think we've made a little bit of progress. Some of the past reforms have helped. They simply haven't gone far enough. Chairman Thornberry, I think, really did show some great leadership on this. Secretary Ash Carter, when he was there, began to move us in this direction. We've done some other transactional authority. We've learned some valuable lessons from programs that have, struggled, like the F-35. So that the B-21, other programs, we moved in a different, better, more positive direction. direction, but on a scale of 1 to 10, we've got about a 2 in terms of how far we've gone. And the acquisition reform bill that you've led on gets us much closer to that 10 we need to get to, and it is crucial that we push it all the way through the process for all the reasons that you stated. Innovation is happening faster now than it ever has in the national security world. The Pentagon, Congress, or defense industrial base are not where they need to be to innovate as quickly as they need to. We need to realign the incentives, as you said, and we need to fundamentally change the culture. And I've said this probably 100 times in this committee now, but the best summary of it I've ever read was in a Foreign Affairs article a couple of years ago where they said the Pentagon was built to be the 1950s Ford Motor Company. It needs to be 2022 Apple. It needs to be an innovative company, and all the cultural pieces that get us there to make that happen are going to be necessary. And it's all sort of 3 pieces of this. The Pentagon needs to change, Congress needs to change, and the defense contractor base needs to change. Because there are incentives in place for all 3 of us to just keep the system where it's at. You know, process, if you work at the Pentagon, if you follow the process, you just sort of slowly stair-step your way up. And if there's 15 people who have been in charge of a program when it fails, it's very easy to go, it wasn't me, it was him. Those incentives are in place. Congress, we, get parochial, we protect our districts, we pound on, bureaucrats when they make mistakes. Meanwhile, we tie their hands so that they can't do it right. So we have to change as well. The defense contractor base, if they get these contracts that just lock them in to getting paid over and over and over again, whether or not they produce a product we need, that works for them too. All of those incentives need to be changed, and the culture needs to change. We've talked about this a lot. I won't go on length about that. I just want to close by saying the one big problem here is DOD and Congress is going to have to work together to get this done. You're not going to be able to do it on your own way. And this administration, this DOD, has shut out Congress more than any other DOD administration I've ever dealt with. It's stunning. I have not personally had a one-on-one conversation with the Secretary of Defense. I've sought out meetings with the Undersecretary for Policy. I've basically been told to piss off. Okay, that's just not going to happen, which is unbelievable to me. It is not just us. I mean, I understand that, to a certain degree, this administration wants Democrats to go away. That sort of partisanship isn't that unusual. But even the majority struggles to get basic information. We have still not been told about what weapons are being shipped to Ukraine by this administration and what their plans are. And again, we've been told, not really our business, okay? We cannot get meetings. We cannot have these consistent conversations. And that's going to be a problem in getting to the acquisition reform that we need. So I hope that improves. Now, don't have to just do what we tell you or whatever, but the basic communication has to happen. And it is not happening on an unprecedented level between the Department of Defense and the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. That needs to change. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member, and I agree with him. This has been disappointing, but I'm optimistic that we're going to have a better path forward with Mr. Duffy. But let me introduce our witnesses. Mr. Michael Duffy is the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. He's accompanied by one of our former staffers here on the HASC, Mr. Jesse Tollison, Jr., who is Acting Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisitions, Logistics, and Technology, Mr. Jason L. Potter, who is performing the duties of Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, Mr. William Bailey, who is performing the duties of Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and Major General Stephen Purdy, Jr., is Acting Assistant Secretary for the Air Force Space Acquisition and Integration. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Duffy, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss acquisition reform at the Department of Defense. I'm honored to be joined by the acting service acquisition executives from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Space Force to discuss this unique opportunity to drive meaningful change within the department. The department is at a critical juncture. We must transform how we deliver integrated capabilities to our warfighters with speed, scale, and operational relevance. The purpose of defense acquisition is clear: to equip our warfighters with the ability to deter our adversaries and win future wars. The geopolitical landscape has shifted dramatically recently. We are no longer in an environment where flexible timelines and risk avoidance are acceptable. What once took a decade must now be delivered in months or weeks to stay ahead of the threat. The urgency is reflected in the SPEED Act's central objective: shortening the requirements to delivery timeline and accelerating production at scale. I appreciate the committee's bipartisan leadership in driving bold reforms like the SPEED Act. Inside the department, we view this committee's leadership as a welcome invitation for partnership and collaboration to get serious about delivering meaningful reform that will drive outcomes. In my role as the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, I strive to fulfill the solemn responsibility and unique opportunity to modernize how the department delivers capability, faster, smarter, and in a collaborative partnership with American industry. My top priorities are clear: deliver capability at speed and scale, rebuild a more resilient defense industrial base, reform outdated processes, and empower our acquisition workforce to operate with agility and confidence. Under the leadership of President Trump and Secretary Hegseth, we've launched the most aggressive acquisition reform initiative in decades. We are streamlining processes, we are cutting bureaucratic delays, and we are leveraging more commercial capabilities for defense solutions. We are focused on increasing the use of rapid and flexible acquisition and contracting authorities, including commercial solutions openings, other transaction authorities, middle tier of acquisition, and the software acquisition pathway. These will enable us to deliver priority solutions to the warfighters with greater speed and agility. It will enable us to build upon the exquisite capabilities provided by our traditional vendor base and to tap a broader array of companies, including startups and non-traditional vendors, to fuel competition and innovation. Across the acquisition and requirements enterprise, we're prioritizing leveraging commercial solutions whenever feasible. Reform also means showing up differently as a customer. We are institutionalizing practices that improve communication, encourage early industry engagement, and accelerate the path from requirement to contract. I'm committed to clarifying, stabilizing, and focusing the demand signal we send to our partners in industry to help incentivize their investments to strengthen the production in alignment with the department's future plans. For capabilities like munitions, we're exploring the pursuit of multi-year contracts with the help and approval of Congress to give industry the certainty of a stable demand signal to invest in supply chains, facilities, and workforce, all the needed requirements for growth. We're also leveraging Title III of the Defense Production Act and the Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program to strengthen sectors like microelectronics, energetics, and critical minerals. None of this is possible without the people who carry it out. Our 167,000-strong workforce is the connective tissue between strategy and execution. These professionals manage complex trade-offs, direct billions in taxpayer dollars, and ensure our warfighters are never outmatched. We're modernizing training, expanding authorities, and embedding a mindset focused on speed, innovation, and mission outcomes. This is what acquisition reform looks like in the 21st century: faster decisions, smarter investments, and ensuring our warfighters receive the lethal capabilities they need on schedule. I look forward to working with this community to continue to drive results worthy of the trust you have placed in us. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy, and I'll recognize myself first for questions. Why do you think that the industrial base keeps shrinking?
That's a great question, one that we're wrestling with every day in the department, because I strongly believe, and I believe my colleagues believe, competition is our friend. And with contracting defense industrial base, we are losing the benefit of competition. I think there's a couple challenges. Number one, we are dependent on exquisite systems. We have technological superiority, and it's difficult, and we are a single customer for a lot of those. And so we have to be creative about how do we open up the opportunity for new entrants to bring this kind of exquisite capability that our warfighter demands in order to maintain competition with the adversary. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity for us to think through how to streamline what it takes to do business with the federal government, the regulations that the SPEED Act goes after, the complexity of the requirements process, and the delay that it takes in order to articulate a need and get to a contract, I think tests the patience and the financial viability of trying to create a venture to do business with the federal government. We're committed to working through that internally. We're encouraged by the work that the committee has done to create legislation that will streamline those processes, in particular the requirements process, where I think we've got a real opportunity to reduce the timeline, to identify a need, bring it to the marketplace, and encourage the innovation of industry to bring creative solutions to help solve that problem, where maybe we don't have to be as dependent on the exquisite systems because innovation is bringing capability that the Pentagon may not have birthed itself.
I think that last statement really hits the nail on the head. You talked about in your opening statement about leveraging commercial solutions. How are you going to balance this need that we have to be able to repair our own equipment and at the same time protect the privately funded intellectual capital that these companies put into these systems?
Well, that innovation and the innovation of industry and the protection of that intellectual property is clearly a competitive advantage for us. And so finding the way to preserve that is critical. I think the data as a service proposal from the SPEED Act is a unique, innovative approach because there is a need for us to have access to the technical data that we need in order to maintain the ability to sustain these systems organically. God forbid we're in a place where the sustainment exceeds the industrial capacity because we are engaged in conflict. We must have an organic industrial base that understands how to leverage the technical data of these systems in order to repair them. And so finding a balance between preserving the intellectual property and providing the department with the access we need to data is a challenge that we're undertaking now. We look forward to working with you in the committee to identify what is the sweet spot of balancing both those needs.
Well, as you probably are aware, we put language in the NDA that passed out of here last week that addresses that. It still needs some love and attention, so we would urge your participation in that process. I think we have the attention of the private sector now, our industry partners. But as you know, this NDA is going to be an evolving product over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So we look forward to a lot of input from you and our industry partners on that topic. As the department works to expand its critical munitions production, you know, one of the things we found in this Ukrainian endeavor, our effort to help Ukraine, is we've seen our stockpiles reduce and had to address this atrophy that we have in our munitions production infrastructure. How are you partnering with our allies, or are you partnering with our allies on co-production and ways to advance interoperability of these systems?
Thank you for the question. I had the opportunity within the first week following being confirmed to visit the Paris Air Show, where I had a chance to meet with all of my counterparts, the national armaments directors of our European allies, Australia, UK, others. And there's considerable interest in how do we explore co-production. My sense is this is really a new area, that we do have some co-production agreements, but we don't have it quite as expansively as it could be. And so inside the department, I'm partnered with the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy to think through what are those conditions under which it's advantageous for us and our allies to enter a co-production agreement. I think one thing we're confronting as we're looking through growth opportunities in the defense industrial base, there are limitations to everything. There's limitations to raw materials and subcomponents, workforce expertise. And so thinking through how do we create an agreement and an arrangement with our allies and partners such that the sum of the whole is greater than the parts when it comes to expanding production is a key element of it. And so I think there's considerable interest. There's complexity, as I mentioned, to the calculation. Do the allies and partners have sufficient demand to justify the economic cost of establishing co-production within their industry? And so I think we are working through how do we help explore these opportunities in a way that's thoughtful.
That goes to the second part of my question, though, and that's what I was really getting at. You know, the ranking member and I have traveled a lot through Europe and talked with our allies in NATO about the challenges. And part of it is interoperability. we need to all be using the same munitions so that if one of us gets into a conflict, we can use what the others have to provide. So that's part of what I'm hoping you'll push in the dialogue with these folks, is that we can all produce it. And if we will all start using these common systems, there's going to be customers because different countries are going to be buying at different times. This is something that General Donahue, who's leading our European Army forces, has really been a proponent of, and he's got 2 followers, and me and the ranking member, and then that's the path forward. So I hope you'll be focused in on that. With that, I'll yield to the ranking member for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the most important thing you said is the acquisition reform, the SPEED Act that we're doing gives us a real chance to make substantial changes. We want to get that right. So I think between now and when we get to that happy day, and hopefully October, November, when we pass the defense bill, making sure that we're working closely together and getting that as close to right as possible is going to be crucial. Just one follow-up on the foreign partner thing, I think it's crucial. To get to the capacity that we need, we're going to need foreign partners. So 2 questions about that. How do you balance that versus some of the domestic content demands? You know, we want to obviously maintain our own industry, but we're not going to get there on our own. So we need the partners. And then second, with the tariffs that have been done in a variety of different places, is the people putting the tariffs in place talking to you guys and saying, okay, how does this impact, you know, where we need to get certain key defense articles? Is the tariff policy contemplating our defense needs in that way? So there's 2 things there.
Yes, sir. First question. I think the way I've thought about approaching this is how do we get, as much as possible, a holistic understanding of the demand across all of our allies and partners. So we've got clear understanding of what our need base is, and then we've got an FMS system that we're looking to reform under direction of the White House to modernize how we track.
Sorry, but I'm more focused not sort of on how we use them, but how we build them. And how we can say, you know, okay, we can't, well, you're talking about shipbuilding or munitions, maybe we've got a partner, maybe Norway can build it. Maybe Australia is beginning to build Gimlers, for instance, the AUKUS deal, you know. But at the same time, we have a lot of domestic demand and, you know, we have a lot of demand for being able to make it in America. That's what I'm interested in, sort of on the development side.
Sure. And I think actually understanding the demand helps on the development side and the supply side to say that we understand that holistic supply. Now let's look at what are the constraints that we face domestically to provide an industrial base that can produce at the capacity that we need, and then how do we look at extending that in ways that are value added. That's why I think it's a complex equation, but we can't be bogged down by thinking it through, as the Pentagon is often guilty of. And so I think on the munitions side, we're exploring, and hopefully this will be part of my theme throughout the discussion today, is the mission that we have is delivering capability. Acquisition reform is an enabler of us to do that more quickly. And so we are taking munitions as that pathfinder to say, let's charge forward fast, ramp quickly, and then think through how do we leverage these enablers, whether it's acquisition reform and streamlining the regulatory burden we place on industry, or exploring the co-production partnership. Because I think you'll, at least in my experience, we'll move more quickly if we're driven by this outcome-based approach to how we're thinking through both acquisition reform and co-production opportunity. So getting that holistic demand picture, I think, sort of puts out a marker for us to pursue. With respect to the tariff policy, we are certainly actively monitoring the impacts of that to defense production. I'll confess I don't have chapter and verse on how those regulatory
There's a lot going on, and it changes rapidly.
Yes,
so
sir.
I can understand that. Yeah.
But certainly we're my team is very attuned to how we can mitigate any impact that might have on our ability to acquire quickly.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be crucial to build up our capacity collectively as an alliance. When you look at all of the needs we have, drones, missiles, ships, we're not going to be able to do it all on our own. So we really want to emphasize those partnerships. Last question. So one of the things that really struck me, the DIU and the efforts at R&D have been really kind of successful in the sense that if you're an innovative company and you've got a good idea, you've got a decent shot of getting a contract to do R&D and develop a new idea in any of 1,000 different places. Where we fall off is if that idea bears fruit and we decide we want it, the gap, the valley of death we talk about between R&D and procurement. Is solving that problem really as simple as just giving more flexible money to the Pentagon to make the quick decision and say, instead of having to change the color of money from R&D to procurement and going through a 2-3-year process, we'll just say, hey, if you like that, we're going to give you $10 billion, go buy it? Or are there other things that we need to change so that we can more quickly get to that point than when we develop a technology, when we develop a capability, and we decide, gosh, I love that, I want 1,000 of them, you can just go do it. How do we make that move more quickly?
I'll start and ask for any input from my colleagues. I think that certainly the flexibility of funding is helpful. I think I'm not an entrepreneur, but I've talked to enough to know that your run rate and your ability to sustain funding to keep a company alive on a 2-year cycle is challenging. And so ensuring that we have the flexibility to make money available to scale those technologies is critical. But I also think it goes back to a lot of the things that we're thinking through in acquisition reform. How are we placing burdens on companies? I think there's a lot of flexibility that maybe we haven't fully taken advantage of with other transaction authorities and trying to provide relief to some of the cost accounting standards to younger non-traditional companies. So that's another opportunity for exploration, because certainly we don't want to miss an opportunity to take advantage of a promising technology because a regulation or a bureaucratic process got in the way.
Okay.
Ranking Member Smith, the Navy's had good success with DIU partnering on some unmanned systems, unmanned surface vessels, unmanned underwater vehicles, where DIU was able to put out an RFI in January 2024. November 2024, the performer demonstrated success, and by May of 25, we were able to award a production OT of about $400 million for a significant number of small USVs. Similar on the UUV front, we had a commercial UUV that DIU was able to test, and it made more sense to go with a FAR-based contract into production, which we've done. So I think DIU is a powerful tool, and we'll work kind of through each use case of what makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Mike Rogers. And first and foremost, I would like to thank all of you for coming to testify today in your service to our nation. Your backgrounds are unprecedented to serve the American people successfully. We appreciate your push for a strong America by way of peace through strength by helping to get us we need to face and deter our enemies. We're in a Cold War we did not choose, between dictators with rule of gun invading democracies with rule of law. War criminal Putin, the regime in Tehran, the Chinese Communist Party, continue to modernize their capabilities and rapidly expand as they grow closer to one another, the largest military peacetime buildup in world history. The U.S. must remain ahead of adversaries to ensure that we maintain peace through strength. And my questions really are in appreciation of Chairman Mike Rogers' bipartisan initiatives. Secretary Duffy, from my 23 years service on the committee, sadly, we've made more attempts at acquisition reform than I care to count. Addressing the issues with our acquisition process is vital to ensuring our warfighters are properly equipped to deter enemies. Technological advances are achieved today remarkably as never before in history. From your view, why is it so hard to fix the system which clearly needs to meet the needs of the warfighters?
Well, thank you for your question, Congressman, and I agree. I've been around the Department of Defense for about 15 years, and it is frustrating that it continues to be a challenge for us to learn how to acquire systems. In that time, as I've thought about how to approach this job, I do think the differentiator is execution and leadership, and so I'm privileged to serve under Deputy Secretary of Defense Feinberg, who I believe is really taking it right to the problem. We are having unprecedented levels of engagement with industry leadership. I was in Huntsville last week talking to the program managers and program executive officers. I think bringing the urgency and the desire for change to the folks that are really executing the mission and ensuring and providing them with the assurance that they have the top cover. So if they're going to take risk, it's under our direction, and it's calculated risk, but it's the risk that's required to move fast. I think when we establish a precedent like that and then we recognize and reward folks who repeat that behavior, it's my hope and my projection that we'll be able to systematize some change.
It's very encouraging. 15 years at the Pentagon, and you're still optimistic. This is good. And Secretary Duffy, I'm grateful to represent the 2nd District of South Carolina. It's the home of AGY of Aiken, a leading innovator in manufacturing of specialty glass fiber solutions serving the global country composites industry. What steps in your office are being taken to ensure that we continue to have the capability to produce unique, critical manufacturing materials in the United States and thus preserve this essential starting point of America's national security supply chain?
It's absolutely critical that we ensure that we've got a diverse industry. One of the challenges that we've confronted as we're thinking through this acquisition reform is our dependency on single-source suppliers, and so finding those unique businesses that, whether they're dual use or single source, how do we reinforce the ability to provide capability from a diverse set of actors? So we're always looking at where is there fragility in the defense industrial base, and how can we apply the resources and authorities that Congress has applied to reinforce that strength.
Well, and it's exciting that AGY also produces the interiors for the 787 Dreamliners that are made by Boeing in Charleston. So we can't have a fusion as China is achieving of military and civilian purposes, and AGY would be classic. Additionally, as you've mentioned, saving time for current commercial offerings, can you give some examples?
Well, I just was having a great discussion with General Purdy before the hearing about how space benefits so tremendously from dual-use application, where the commercial industry is stimulating investment that the department can benefit from. And so I think looking across all of our offering, all of our needs, and identifying how are there ways for us to leverage commercial investment to extend the purchasing power of the Pentagon is top of mind.
Thank you very much. And again, we appreciate each one of you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I just want to follow up on Mr. Smith's opening comments about the need for the department and Congress to continue to collaborate at the highest level possible. I want to spend a minute on shipbuilding, which Mr. Potter is obviously got a lot of really outstanding experience. In my opinion, the industrial base is actually expanding right now. The industrial base funding, which Congress started in 2018, initially as the SIB and now is the MIB, the Maritime Industrial Base. We're now seeing in Alabama, South Carolina, Florida, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, strategic outsourcing and new shipyard growth in every one of those areas there for steel fabrication that, again, is shifting man hours for the Virginia and Columbia class program, which is critically necessary. The MIB, in my opinion, has been a real success story because it's very agile. It's a direct reporting program and, obviously fully accountable to the department and to us. That, again, have been funding it at a very high level. I would note, Mr. Secretary, that last week when we did the NDAA, there was a bipartisan amendment that restricted the use of funds to move the MIB from its present organizational location. There is obviously lots of chatter that it may get moved to NAVSEA, which, again, without any consultation with any of us who, and Mr. Potter knows this, have been directly involved in the plus-up of industrial base investment going back 7 years in terms of this possible move. Again, I have the highest respect for Admiral Downey. He's just an outstanding leader at NAVSEA, but they have a full portfolio in terms of the work that they're already doing, and basically stopping the MIB to shift it to a new organization and then basically have a totally different sort of mechanism for, again, that kind of investment, which I just described for the different shipyards. In my opinion, that's the opposite of the SPEED Act. So again, I would ask you today just to commit to the fact that Congress, obviously through the amendment, which Mr. Whitman and I supported last week, has definitely strong investment and intent in terms of this area, and hopefully that you will consult with us before any final decision is made.
Thank you for bringing it to my attention, and certainly receive your input, and we'll work with Mr. Potter and the team and consult with you before anything is finalized.
Right. Mr. Potter, did you want to?
I agree, Congressman.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Secretary, in terms of the co-production discussion that was happening earlier, which again I think is something that's very, I think the appetite amongst our allies is very high right now, obviously because of Putin and what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. The AUKUS agreement, which again Congress authorized 2 years ago, in my opinion, is the sort of perfect model for co-production. In the authorities that we enacted, we knocked down all the defense export controls that has the ITAR inhibitions to co-production and acquisition now are fully cleared for both the UK and Australia. This morning, the Australian government announced the second down payment in the AUKUS commitment that they made of $800 million. That takes the tally up to $1.6 billion that Australia is going to be investing in our industrial base. Again, there's a review going on, which is totally fair game, with a new administration. But I have to tell you, we wrote a bipartisan letter supporting AUKUS from this committee. The Select Committee on China a couple days ago did exactly the same thing, Republican and Democrat supporting AUKUS. We're not getting a lot of visibility in terms of this process. And I would just, reiterate, well, I've got you here. Again, you want to talk about joint production of unmanned systems with, Anduril in Australia, some of the, again, investment that they just announced into our country. We had to pass a law to allow them to send us money, which shows the depth of their commitment to that process. That, again, hopefully people are listening that there's high interest and intent to make it work. If there's improvements that the review is going to put forward, I think we would embrace them. But to sort of, again, stop it or retard it would be a huge mistake. And with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us. Secretary Duffy, congratulations. I know you have a challenging course ahead, but I know you're laser focused to get things done. As the chairman pointed out, with passing the National Defense Authorization last week, one of the provisions that I was able to secure in there would extend the terms of program executive officers to 6 years from 3 years. And the language clarifies this isn't about impeding promotions or about impeding career trajectories, but this is about giving our PEOs more authority over the incorporation of new technologies, have them be more forward-looking, incentivize positive risk-taking, supporting accountability. One of the great examples of that is naval reactors. Naval reactors is a 6-year billet. It is about making sure that there is a no-fail scenario there in naval reactors. That should be the standard that we put in place for all other program executive offices as well as program managers. I would argue a lot of times there's lack of willing to take risks, there's lack of willing to project things forward. In some instances, it's like if I can just get my 3 years done and get out of here, I'm going to be okay. And they don't want to take the risk necessary to really move us forward. So I just wanted to hear from you. Are you willing to work with us to make sure that as that transitions, as this requirement hopefully comes into place, that we can actually get this in place and that we can enable this now extension of term here to really provide the impetus for these program executive officers to do what I know they can all do, and a lot of times what they want to do. This gives them the window to be able to get that done. Well,
thank you for your leadership on that issue. I will say that we can talk about acquisition reform, and we should, and we will, but none of it's enabled if we don't have a workforce that's empowered to execute it. Yeah. And so we are undertaking an initiative that was directed by the Modernization of Acquisition Process Executive Order issued in April that asks us to examine the workforce holistically. What are the roles, and how do we optimize that? So I think that's very aligned with your proposal. You know, I think I appreciate a couple of your comments there. Authority, incentives, accountability all need to be key ingredients to how we tackle this problem. So 100% have our commitment to work together to figure that out.
That's great, Mr. Secretary, and thank you. You're right. Empowerment gives the ability for everyone to be part of that vision to move things forward. Also, in the 26 FY26 National Defense Authorization Act, there's a provision there that would scale up the successful model that's put forward by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that'll allow more companies that in the qualified Department of Defense consortiums, much like the one that is in your office, the Defense Industrial Base Consortium, to sponsor facilities clearance. So to be able to get more people into the classified space so they can actually understand what are the needs. And a lot of times these are smaller companies. These are companies that, you know, don't have the ability to build their own skiff, but they would like to participate in this. And this, I think, will help us solve a lot of problems as far as getting a wider scope of businesses interested, a wider scope of businesses that can participate, a wider scope that'll actually be knowledgeable about, you know, what's DARPA looking for, what's the DoD looking for, what are the things that we can do. And we talk about, you know, COTS and all the things we can do to bring commercial technology. Well, if the companies out there don't know what Department of Defense is looking for, if we don't give them more of a windshield or more of a place to have access, then we won't get those companies to play in that space. So I'm committed to working with you to expand those opportunities. Want to get your perspective if there are additional things that we can do in addition to the Defense Industrial Base Consortium opportunities to provide those openings for folks to understand what are the needs of the DoD.
Thank you for highlighting that. I'm encouraged. My newest colleague, Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, Brad Hansel, was confirmed last night. Mm-hmm. This is one of those issues that overlaps with him, and so I'll look forward to working with him because I do recognize it as a constraint on new businesses and startups to get access to facilities and clearances, and I think it's one of those barriers we want to remove if we can.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your work on the SPEED Act together with Ranking Member Smith. I want to follow up on what Ranking Member Smith said. If this is going to work, we have to have all the information that we need and request from the department. I would hope never to have Mr. Smith or any one of us repeat what he said earlier about the Defense Department, and maybe one or two of you that are on the panel simply not responding to the request. I would recommend you never, ever fail to respond to requests to this committee, particularly from the ranking member and the chair. There's a heavy price to pay, and you will eventually pay it. So I want to start with that. The weapons acquisition program that the GAO has assessed is $2.4 trillion over the years ahead. 106 programs, 79 major defense acquisition programs, 20 middle tier, 7 future major weapons programs. It goes on and on and on. Clearly, the oversight of this committee not only demands information, but requires information. There's an ongoing dispute over who controls the GAO. Let me be clear. The GAO is not your department. The GAO works for us. And if you want to have a fight, we'll fight about that. Internal to the Department of Defense are multiple review organizations, many of which are being gutted, presumably in the area of faster, better. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I would be recommending caution on the gutting and the elimination of many of those internal organizations, the IG, the Comptroller General, Acquisition, Sustainment, and so on and so forth. Do they really slow down, or are they really necessary to make sure the program actually works and that the costs associated with it are appropriate? So I would urge caution as you move forward with what is a wholesale gutting of some of these organizations that are necessary to review the ongoing. We're all for speed. In your testimony, Mr. Duffy, you spoke about the consolidation. Yes, it is clearly a problem and needs to be addressed. The lack of competition at that level doesn't exist. And that's where most of the money is. Mr. Potter, you raised the issue of the DIU. Seems to work. Particularly, we'll probably hear space, major issue in space, major opportunity for space. You just heard from my colleague about some of the inability of those who might find their way through the DIU process, some of the barriers that are there, secrecy, et cetera. Efforts to eliminate that or to work that out, very, very important. I'm hopeful that the DIU program can be expanded, that there would be new organizations, new innovation, whether it's from Silicon Valley or any other part of America, that it could work its way through the DIU. So keep it going for all of you. Some of you have experience in this. Some of you need it. Let us know. We're from the government and we're here to help. Okay? So let's work together on that. I have a whole series of questions, but I would really urge your attention to be very, very careful about eliminating those oversight programs, even the programs that are there to see if what you're buying actually works. So please be careful about that. I'm going to yield back my remaining time. Just let you know, do not stiff arm us when we ask for information. It's not a good path for you to go down. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a little bit along the lines of the gentleman from California, but Mr. Duffy, you noted that the current defense acquisition system is no longer serving key stakeholders effectively, often delaying the adoption of the critical technology to equip our warfighters and make them a more lethal and agile force. What specific reforms would you recommend to streamline the acquisition process while maintaining accountability and oversight?
Well, I think it is a key balance to make sure that we're accelerating but maintaining the rigor that Mr. Garamendi mentioned. And I think it's, I do think it's empowerment of the workforce, ensuring that they can exercise judgment, knowing they have top cover. We have a deep body of knowledge and expertise on how to develop these systems. But when we have a compliance of culture, a culture of compliance that is so risk averse, I think we tend to apply the brakes. The workforce tends to apply the brakes out of self-preservation, and so that's where I think we're working hard to get to drive that level of urgency. As we promote these acquisition reform initiatives, such as streamlining some of the regulatory burdens we place on contractors, where we can provide judgment to the contracting officer to find the right application of, does a stronger or more regimented approach to applying this contract apply in this scenario? You have that freedom to exercise that judgment. Or, do we not need to check every box on that compliance list that then slows down the process. So I think it's a matter of, we've got great professionals in the acquisition workforce, but I'm not sure we have the incentives that enable them to move out and execute effectively. And that's where I think we bring that leadership to ensure that they understand what are the full scope of authorities that Congress has granted. You have our top cover to go execute them and do it at speed.
Okay. And each of you have highlighted how excessive oversight and regulatory requirements for government customers have slowed progress and increased cost across the DoD. However, many of those requirements were introduced in response to findings of waste, fraud, and abuse within the department programs. How will the SPEED Act and continued implementation of the President's executive orders help to streamline oversight while still maintaining efficiency, innovation, and cost effectiveness in defense procurement and production? And how can the committee further empower the department to improve our acquisition process while maintaining appropriate oversight? I've got 2 minutes, so anyone on the panel who would like to chime in can, and I'll just open it up to each of you in the time we have.
Sir, I would just say it comes back to accountability and just empowerment of those program executive officers and those contracting officials. And it comes back to training as well, just to make sure that we have the most trained and well-versed workforce. And I think going forward with that, we should be still in a very good place to maintain fair and reasonable pricing.
Sir, I agree with everything that's been said. I would just add, I think it's incumbent on the people at this table, your defense acquisition executive and the service acquisition executives, to set the standard and to sort of instill the culture and to drive the change. And that's what we're committed to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I certainly echo those thoughts. I think as we take a look at how rules get laid in place, as we take it, as we look at those failures and setbacks, and that turns into risk avoidance in the future. For us to take a different look at that and engage with that risk, we should understand why the rule was placed there, and if it's not getting us the right outcome, for us to exercise some leadership and challenge that rule.
And I would echo the Secretary's remarks on a culture of compliance versus speed. That's a real key area that we've been focusing on in space in particular. And then the SPEED Act hits on a couple of key areas: portfolio management, funding flexibility, and then I would even add delegation. Those are key areas where I think that we've got examples in the last several months where, had we had those authorities in place, we might have been able to get activity done faster.
Very efficient use of my last 2 minutes. Thank you all. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank the witnesses for coming here today. And as you can see how excited we are about the defense acquisition reform. And the folks that you're seeing here are the ones particularly on the hardware committee on what we're dealing with day in and day out. So we talk about building capacity, and we've seen across our industrial base, not just for defense, but our country, outsource so much of what we used to do. And how do we bring that back? A couple of years ago, we passed the Mines Act, which talks about domestic content. And the idea of buying American is a great concept, but there are details. Not just to buy a reason, it's to build that capacity so when we need to use it, it's going to be there. And one of the most difficult things in building that capacity is building the workforce, the skilled workforce. You don't order that and get it in 2 weeks. That takes a generation. So the idea of domestic content, incredibly important. So when we talk about the awareness the department has of, in major acquisition programs, was 55%. And there's all kinds of Swiss cheese how they can get around that. And what the Mines Act did over 7 years was to increase it to 75%. Not just for the sake of buying American, which is a great concept, but to build our capacity. Not just to say for a year, but over the years. Part of that in the 24 NDAA was that we were to get a report due in December 24. That has passed. We have not received that. So, Mr. Duffy, first and foremost, will you make sure that we get that report in a timely fashion? Because the idea of not knowing what contains our domestic content is a real issue that we've been dealing with.
Yes, sir. I will. We'll get that to you.
And that goes on year to year, so we can understand what is coming down, because coming through the pandemic, we learned the hard way, and certainly much of what we're doing here today focuses directly on building our capacity. I just want to shift a little bit. It was mentioned the right to repair, the intellectual property of a company. So we want more off the shelf. Great concept. But then we immediately get into something that was developed by a corporation for a profit motive, and yet you want to have those intellectual rights to repair it. This is an extremely difficult issue to talk about, particularly when we're building, let's say, for a vehicle that's built on a commercially available. The idea of just turning it over is something that is going to be a problem. The F-35 is the old way. We unfortunately don't own that, and we are paying for it as we go down the road. But how do you balance the right to repair, what we need in the field at the appropriate time, versus a company's intellectual property? It can't be all cases all the way. We took a stab at this in the NDAA, but this is going to be an ongoing issue, particularly when you're asking off the shelf. How are you going to deal with that?
I think it's a very important and excellent question, and I think we have to be creative about how do we, is there a surgical way to get access to the data that we need in order to enable us to repair and sustain the systems without violating the intellectual property protections that are the profit motive for corporations and are really the enabler of our industrial capability. And so I don't, sitting before you, have the answer today, but I assure you I understand the complexity of the issue, and it's one that we have some of our best folks. Sustainment is an ongoing challenge, and just thinking through how do we, when you're competing for resources, how do we ensure that we have that adequately addressed so that we have operational readiness is a high priority of mine, and this is an important element of that. So I assure you we are getting after this problem and trying to figure this out.
So each one of the hardware committees is very much focused on that to make it work for both sides, because that innovation is the very issue that we want to capture and move on. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Duffy, we all know that DoD facilities like Red River, some of them are underutilized, and we added language in the NDAA to explore how we can best use them moving forward. And so what I wanted to ask you was if you have any plans or what y'all are working on to repurpose the sites. And another concern that I have is you've got a highly skilled labor force, at Red River, at that depot and others. And once those folks, if we happen to lay them off, they're gone, and we're not going to get them back. And it's very difficult to replace that kind of labor. That's a huge resource for the military. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for your question. Generally speaking, I come at the problem recognizing that we have constraints in our industrial base across the board, whether it's workforce, skill sets, supply chain, facilitization. And so anytime we have excess capacity, I think we don't take a hard look at how can we leverage that or repurpose it for purposes of whether it's sustainment or increased expansion capability for our munitions industrial base. I don't here today have for you an answer on the Red River. I don't know if my colleague from the Army's got another perspective on it.
Yeah, I can chime in here for a second, sir. Sure. And thanks for the question. And the comments about the workforce, we fully acknowledge that, and we would be concerned about that. So what we're doing is, in concert with General Mohan at the Army Materiel Command, we are lockstep in this as far as trying to figure out ways and better courses of action to how to sustain those types of facilities and depots. So for Red River, it's looking at how can we streamline the public-private partnership aspect, but also how can we leverage private capital to go in there and just invest there. So things like Sky Foundry, looking at broadening the mission sets at those depots to potentially produce things like UAS components, for small UAS, creating a new industry there, or just having that organic capability that we could always fall back on to surge. That would be huge for us. In that, as we do that, the intent would be then is that you get more venture capital to come in and start to invest around that area and then just potentially create a market space.
Well, I think we know that, I mean, the demand for drones and unmanned vehicles, whether they be in the air, ground, sea, are greatly enhanced. I think Ukraine taught us that, and that was one of the thoughts that we had, and not just me on this committee. Ironically, other members came to me and talked about maybe switching over because JLTVs and Humvees aren't, you know, working on those isn't going to have, there's just not that need, but there is that,
Right, sir.
you know, conversely, this incredible need, and where are we going to produce those? You know, and making them with just American parts and maybe not our greatest geopolitical adversaries' parts. Right. Could be. And touching on that, I just wanted to ask as well, Secretary Duffy, about AI and how, you know, your vision for it. Clearly, we want to make sure it's streamlined and seamless for military application. And I think that's an invaluable thing to discuss for a minute.
Absolutely, it's a key enabler, and our adversaries, unfortunately, are embracing it, and so we have to move quickly to find out how we can apply it operationally. But I also think there's opportunity. I mentioned earlier I've been in the Pentagon for 15 years, and one of my biggest frustrations is the lack of modern business process management. I mean, you can look across the acquisition system in all the disciplines, whether it's financial management, testing, requirements. There's all kinds of opportunities to bring how we do business into the 21st century, which I think is a key foundation to then finding ways to apply artificial intelligence internally to how the Pentagon operates, whether it's AI-enabled design, where we could do better optimize the systems we're developing, or optimizing how we're expending our resources. So what I think about in terms of how to accelerate and improve the way we do our work, I think there's tremendous opportunity for AI. And then certainly with respect to enabling operations and finding ways to apply it responsibly in the deployment of our systems and in our operations is an area where I have less visibility and expertise, but I know we're actively pursuing opportunities to enable the warfighter who can help us identify ways to apply it to improve how we win and fight wars.
Yeah, I kind of didn't think of it that way. AI can help us use AI more efficiently for the DoD. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to a lot of effort and pressure, the F-35 program is marginally improving, just in time for drones and other unpiloted aircraft to basically take over warfare. I think it'll probably go down in history as a huge, massive waste of taxpayer dollars. But what lessons have we learned from this? Undersecretary Duffy?
I think we've learned a lot of lessons. Number one, I think there is an element of, and I think you'll see some of that based on my conversations with my colleagues in the Air Force, of F-47, where we maintain a government reference architecture, which inherently in the design of the system gives us insights into how the system is architected, allows us to maintain competition in the development of mission systems and hopefully competition throughout the life cycle of the program. So that's number one. I think number two is, we need to go fast. We want to go fast. But the risk of concurrency in pursuing technologies that are not fully mature yet, trying to incorporate them into a weapon system can end up slowing us down. So I think it's having the expertise to apply the judgment to find how can we accelerate and how do we need to just slow down a little bit and make sure we're doing rigorous evaluation of how to deploy mature technologies into systems that doesn't delay us in the long run.
Another problem with the F-35 is that they tried to get a part in every state. And that's one of the reasons why it's taken a lot of effort for Congress to apply pressure, because there are a lot of colleagues who don't want to lose that business. How are we going to fix that with the F-47?
Sir, I might defer to my Air Force colleague on the acquisition strategy on the F-47.
No, I appreciate that as well. The idea of, like Undersecretary Duffy had just mentioned, the approach there regarding the government's understanding of how the work will be done by Boeing, in this case, what are the suppliers to those guys? Are they really the best in class? Are they really performing? Using an open architecture so that if one isn't performing, what are the alternatives? Maintaining a base of potential suppliers so that we are not completely locked in.
So let's talk about that base for a second. In the last 30 years, DoD has dropped from 51 prime contractors to 5. Do you believe that this is an over-consolidated market? Or are there things that DoD should do to increase competition under Secretary Duffy?
I absolutely think competition is critical in ensuring that we're preserving competition when we're thinking about, it's a challenge, right? You want to always pursue I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, should previous administrations have pursued antitrust litigation, or what? Like, how do we prevent this over-consolidation?
My focus is going forward, and I think it's how do we think through when we're making acquisition decisions, and I do think F-47 is an example of the new kind of thinking that we need, where we're not surrendering the entire architecture of the system and the acquisition strategy to a single contractor, where we can maintain diversity in a single platform and participate in the competition going forward.
And I agree with that, but if there are only a handful of contractors, then you're kind of back in the same position. So how do we prevent this over-consolidation in the industry?
Well, I think that you will always have a need for these exquisite systems for traditional vendors who can bring together a supply chain workforce, all of that. But I think that in this case, where you have a more open approach to those subsystems, you can be diversifying the industrial base actively as a government, where you're more participatory in who are the suppliers that are providing those subsystems. And it's that stepping stone from a subsystem to a prime it's a required, I think, for growth of the defense industrial base.
Mr. Bailey, did you want to add something?
Yeah, sir, if I could pile on as well, because certainly along those lines, right, you have only it is very capital intensive to go through to have facilities to be able to construct all those things. So we look at other opportunities in the industrial base at those subsystem levels, certainly, but that's not to totally forget that we can create more opportunities to bring new entrants in or scale smaller ones, and we see that in our collaborative combat aircraft program, where we have the companies that are performing in there are not from that traditional ilk, right? And they are looking at how to build complete systems, and then the question for them is now we take a look at their ability to produce on those as well.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Massachusetts brings up a topic that's going to take a lot of time for this committee in the future. That is a huge challenge that he just addressed, that we really don't have the solutions to, but we're going to have to figure it out if we're going to be able to meet the threats that we have. But with that, I will recognize Ms. Kiggins from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our hearing panelists today for being here. I appreciate the work that's being done to speed up the acquisition procurement process. We hear a lot of complaints about it. I represent Virginia's 2nd District, so home to the Atlantic Fleet with the Navy. We've got the East Coast Master Jet Base down there. Just wanted to talk a little bit about future of naval aviation. I'm starting to sound like a broken record from this seat every single hearing, talking about the money or lack of money that's been allocated to naval aviation specifically. And I think our prior question was a great lead-in, because we are hearing a lot about F-47 the project, and I know that Department of Defense is now talking about taking money away from our FAXX program, putting it towards F-47s. I've got an aging fleet of F-18s at Naval Air Station Oceana. I have no commitment from the Navy about the home basing of F-35s even there. So I know that Congress has been very clear and allocated and appropriated over $1 billion for this FAXX program. I have been told by Navy leadership time and time again about the future of naval aviation really rests on the FAXX program. So I just wanted to know when this is going to be cleared up and when Congress will be reassured that this proposed program will be executed. And I'd like to hear from Mr. Duffy and then Mr. Potter.
Well, I think that's an ongoing discussion within the department. Is the president made the decision to go with F-47. There's a continuing discussion about FAXX and the opportunity on the Navy Air, and so I would defer to Mr. Potter on more detail.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Congresswoman, as you know, the Chief of Naval Operations has a requirement for sixth-generation aircraft for the future carrier air wing, and the department's committed to getting our warfighters the sixth-gen aircraft they need as soon as possible. The stakeholders across the DoD are working to manage the risk across FAXX and other programs to make sure none are delayed, and we'll expect to have a way ahead in the near term. It's an ongoing discussion, as the Undersecretary said, within the department, and we look forward to continuing to work with this committee on it.
Well, when we talk about taking that money from the Navy and we can't use F-47s on aircraft carriers, so I need more of a commitment, more of decisive leadership coming from the Navy saying that we are going to prioritize that East Coast Master Jet Base either in the form of F-35s, in the form of FAXX. Congress could not be more clear in our piece of the puzzle and our being a balance of one of our a branch of our government and where we want that money allocated. So it is a further discussion, but when you talk about timeliness, and I know this whole hearing is about the timeliness of acquisition procurement, I'm out of time on my naval aviation side. My Hornets are over 30 years old out there, and they've been a great fighting platform. But when you look at what we're faced with our potential China fight, I need FAXX, I need F-35s, I need to get them in the hand of my carrier air wings on the East Coast Master Jet Base. Oh, by the way, we only have 2, West Coast, East Coast. Please prioritize that. I want to a little bit talk about shipyards, my remaining time, just because I have a lot of those in Hampton Roads as well. Just wondering about if there's any appetite for public-private partnerships. We talk about the infrastructure needs, infrastructure upgrades at Navy shipyards under the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Plan, SIOP plan. Mr. Duffy, is there any appetite for maybe a public-private partnership? Because I feel like that might be the quickest way to get some of these infrastructure repair work done.
Very happy to explore the public-private partnership model. Shipbuilding industrial base is a big challenge, and I know that Congress has made a significant investment to ensure that we've got modern facilities. The Deputy Secretary of Defense is working in partnership with the Secretary of the Navy on exploring all options to ensure that we have a workforce and an infrastructure base that can support the needs of shipbuilding and ship maintenance, and so happy to, open to all ideas on that.
Great, thank you. And then also wanted to ask if there is any effort to co-develop things with our allied partners, and specifically we had a meeting this week about directed energy systems in the form of Iron Dome. I know our Israeli partners have really worked and almost perfected probably that system, and we're talking about implementing Golden Dome here, and just wondering if there's any, again, appetite for co-development or licensing such systems, especially so we can put them in things like Navy ships, and we know we have a lot of use for directed energy platforms, so we don't need to spend the time, reinvent the wheel. We've got great allied partners who are working on these projects.
I think that makes a lot of sense. My colleague, Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, is really focused on how do we get cutting-edge technology ready to scale, and so I'd be happy to have a conversation with him about how are we pursuing co-development opportunities.
Thank you, appreciate that. My time's up. I yield back, thank you.
Generally yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been over a year since Space Force and the Department each published their commercial space strategies. To maintain space superiority, we need to lean into commercial space industry. Let's be clear, the Space Force and the entire Department of Defense, for that matter, is dependent on commercial space industry. General Purdy and Secretary Duffy, can you tell me where the Space Force is at on the implementation of the commercial space strategy?
Sir, thanks for the question. The commercial space strategy has quite a few implementation steps throughout it. Many of those are on the operational side, and the Space Force can take for QFR, the details of what we're doing there. On the acquisition side, we've got quite a few activities going on, one of which is a complete survey across all our program managers and all our PEOs on the status of what they're doing to consider commercial space and actually make progress. We've been laying the steps for that for years with our activity with both DIU and SpaceWorks, SBIR Phase 1, Phase 2s, and then getting into StratFi, cooperative relationships with venture capital. That's been very successful. We built a good pool of commercial new space companies. Those companies are now starting to bid on multiple different activities. You see them in Space Development Agency. You see that in our new GPS RGXX program, which is the GSAP replacement. And so we're starting to see success with commercial new companies' penetration into our acquisitions. In addition, as we're exploring data as a service and acquisitions as a service in certain different areas to be able to just wholesale buy activity as a service. So pretty good. We have a long way to go. It's a culture change that has to occur across the entire organization, from the requirements to the acquirers to the ops acceptance testing. And so there's a lot of cultural angles there, but each one of those organizations has been tasked by the CSO and the acting SE, myself, to continue to move that ball forward.
Thank you, Secretary Duffy.
In ANS, we're focused on how can we enable General Purdy and his execution on taking advantage of the dual use and commercial focus of space. And so we'll continue a dialogue on where there are policy barriers and opportunities to leverage commercial to move forward in that important domain.
Thank you. Does the Space Force have the authorities needed to fully take advantage of the commercial space industry? And if not, what else do we need to do?
I think we do have the broad-based authorities, particularly with SPEED Act and the discussions of acquisition reform coming down. I'm excited about those. One of my main focus areas, and Secretary mentioned it, is this compliance culture versus a speed culture. We still have across the department, and particularly in Space Force and in the functional areas, compliance culture, and it's based on the incentives of the individuals. It's not for any lack of malice or whatnot. Many of the individuals are trying to do as best as they can, follow the rule sets and regulations that they can, while also delivering as much capability to the warfighter as they can. And therein lies the dichotomy. Many times we focus on as much capability as possible, which ends up slowing our acquisition because we want that extra couple of percent. A culture of speed and a culture of commercial is about good enough. It's about requirements that are good enough that we can get after that commercial capability. So we continue to move that forward, and I would argue it's as much a culture, if not more a culture discussion, than an authority discussion.
Secretary Duffy, anything to add?
Well, I think General Purdy hit on it pretty well, especially when it comes to whether it's the SPEED Act or the internal workings within the department to provide greater flexibility under requirements. I think that will give us the pathway to take better advantage of commercial technologies which may not have been inherently designed to meet military needs but are good enough for us to be able to leverage much more quickly.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to think for a minute. Can you give an example of both a success and a failure of commercial space integration and any lessons we learned?
Okay. A couple of successes that I would poke at would be starting success. We haven't seen the fruition of that. When we stopped the GSAT program and we moved into a commercial-based model, we took requirements off. That allowed us to go from a classified activity to an unclassified activity and to get after commercial and hopefully even foreign military sales. That is a success to start that acquisition program. I would argue that the NSSL Phase 3 activity that we stood up for launch, particularly Lane 1, is all about setting up a structure of success for commercial. And I struggle to come up with a failure right off the top of my head, sir.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I have a couple more questions that I will submit to you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Mesmer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members or witnesses, for being here today. General Purdy, you've previously discussed OTAs in front of this committee and how Space Force has increased the use of OTAs by 470%. As the DoD works to implement Golden Dome Initiative and modernize defense acquisition, what lessons learned can you share on using these innovative authorities in bringing space programs from RFI to award to development and eventually production?
So, sir, from initial discussions with General Gutlein and the team, for particularly on the SBI, the Space-Based Interceptor piece, we continue to use all these lessons learned and continue to grow forward. They intend to be as fast as possible. They've already hit commercial a couple of times in those areas. So constructs like OTAs, which are exactly correct, 470% increase in the last couple of years on the Space Force side. Constructs of MTAs, which are the acquisition kind of broad strategies, allow you to move fast. Contract mechanisms like CSOs, which have also increased by over 300%. Those serve as baselines. And then on the SBI piece, they're looking at really additional novel ideas like prize activities, cooperative work with industry, where they're leveraging industry development. And then I think I'm going to go back to that requirements element. We're not trying to gold standard and define the requirements up front, but broadly speaking, what are we trying to get after and let industry bid to those pieces? And then we have the maturity and flexibility to pick different elements that might have different levels of capability, but each provide their own uniqueness and bring those forward. And finally, the opportunity to have multiple winners in the end game and not just a one and done, I think is critical. It allows you to have, continue to build that industrial base that allows you extra resiliency.
Okay, excellent, thank you. I applaud your statement in your testimony highlighting how OTAs can expand participation in the defense ecosystem, accelerate innovation to meet our modern day demands. As stated by the Modernizing Defense Acquisition Executive Order, the DoD should prefer commercial solutions and have general preference for OTAs over other streamlined authorities. Are you considering the broadest possible pool of acquisition authorities for procuring advanced technology available to the space industry when looking towards development of the Golden Dome?
Yes, sir. We're looking at all the available tools, particularly the tools that are will be coming from the Hill in this new NDAA. The intention is to go as fast as possible, and that means setting broad guidelines and standing out of the way, and then using all the contractual tools possible to move fast. Again, focusing on speed and not compliance, and I know that team is definitely focused on that.
Okay, super. Mr. Duffy, under your office's purview is the Industrial Base Fund, a fund set up with a mission to support the defense industrial base expansion to counter vulnerable supply chain choke points. I believe the IBF's mission is essential and that the fund should be modernized to enable the DoD to prioritize the most urgent needs and ensure those efforts are fully and appropriately resourced. Can I get a commitment from you to work with myself and my office to ensure these modernization efforts move forward in the most concrete form possible?
You have my commitment, sir. We are undertaking an aggressive effort to ensure that we apply the best due diligence and introduce accountability when we're dispersing these funds so that we're assured that the department gets the return on investment to expand the industrial base and really meet the needs of the department.
Very good. Mr. Duffy and Mr. Tollison, I joined a list of fellow Congress members on July 17th, 2025, to Secretary Driscoll expressing concerns over the potential award to a foreign entity on the contract to build the main propulsion system on the next generation battle tank. How is this consistent with potentially a foreign country being awarded, consistent with building up our domestic defense industrial base?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that particular issue. I will say, though, generally speaking, I believe that we would always prefer domestic to the extent that we have it available, but to the extent that it constrains our ability to move fast, I think we always would need to look for where do we have industrial capacity. So I defer to my Army colleague in case he has additional comment there.
Okay.
I would say, sir, thanks for the question. We're very much aware of what the letter was asking for. So this, as you know, was in it's part of the M1E3 acquisition strategy as far as essentially starting the development of the next generation Abrams tank. The way that strategy is set up is the prime contractor is sort of the lead systems integrator, and they were in charge of picking their subs. And one of the subs that they chose to go with, my understanding, they went with a Spanish transmission that will be produced here in the state of Michigan, I believe. But it is something that we are heavily engaged in now, and we're going to work with the PM to better understand exactly what went into the decision space for that contractor to...
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Hampshire, Ms. Goodlander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Duffy, I really appreciate your testimony about the importance of competition in the defense industrial base, and I'm grateful to the chairman and the ranking member for their leadership on acquisition reform, which is such a crucial part of promoting competition, which is going to go to the heart of cutting down on waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's going to strengthen our military readiness across the board. I wanted to ask you, just thank you for your written testimony on the major defense acquisition program reviews that are underway. From your testimony, I take it that these reviews are still ongoing. Is that the case?
That is correct, yes.
And I did notice that it's a 90-day review, so I'm just curious if you have a sense of, from the April 9th executive order, when you expect your review to be complete?
So we do have an initial review that we're working through that will support deliverable to the White House. I know we're a little late on that, but we're working towards that initial review, which was a combination of conversations with the programs and an analysis of the data that's available. But I think we're viewing the MDAP review process as continuous, right? It's a constant opportunity for us to evaluate the performance of those programs and engage with those program leaders to ensure that we're providing the top cover and support they need to execute.
I couldn't agree more. It should be an ongoing review. How many programs are you looking at overall? Is it 72?
That's correct, 72 MDAPs.
And can you tell us now, of these programs that you've reviewed, are there any programs that are on schedule?
I'm sorry, I don't have the aggregate data. I'd be happy to provide that to you. I do believe we do have some successful programs that we're championing, like the B-21 is one that I believe we have, Mr. Bailey may correct me, but I believe we view that as a model program that performs on cost and schedule.
That's great. Well, be eager to hear what you're learning throughout this review and ways we can work together to raise up the gold standards and to identify and raise up the gold standards. You know, I wanted to ask, there have been some questions about the right to repair. This is something I'm very passionate about. I'm grateful that this has been a truly bipartisan issue. When I think about it, it really goes to the core of readiness. It goes to the core of cutting down on waste, fraud, and abuse. I want to ask you, as we look at, there are, of course, some technical issues to work out, some big questions about how we balance priorities and imperatives, but as we look towards implementation, I'm curious if there are particular systems that come to mind for you that you would say we should be focused on and prioritizing as we work to maximize readiness and reduce the risks to our service members?
I'm not sure that I've got a specific system, but I can talk you through kind of the thinking, right? I mean, the one, of course, priority is the criticality of systems to the warfight, right? All our systems are important, but which ones are critical and how does that measure against the current operational readiness? And then how does that measure against our dependency on ensuring that they're sustained? So I think that would be part of, as we're working through those MDAP reviews, not just thinking about where are we in terms of developing and procuring those systems, but how are we thinking about what it would be required for us to maintain a whole of life cycle plan to address sustainment and I mean, traditionally two-thirds the cost of a weapon system is in the sustainment of it. And so ensuring that we're thinking ahead when we're acquiring a system to manage the cost and the ability for us to sustain that system throughout its life cycle needs to be paramount.
Well, I thank you for that and look forward to continuing the conversation. You know, my home district, New Hampshire, is home to a number of small businesses that are really crucial to our nation's submarine and shipbuilding programs. These companies are really at the core of supporting DoD and the Navy in meeting their 2+1 Virginia-class and Columbia-class submarine manufacturing goal. In the past few months, I know the department has awarded a number of contracts to prime shipyards to cover large inflationary cost increases over the past 5 years. Small businesses in my district have said that they're facing the exact same challenges. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Duffy and Mr. Potter, too, and I'll ask you this on the questions for the record, too, but I'm curious to know more about the department's approach to assisting small businesses, second and third tier suppliers like the ones in my district who are also experiencing these challenges.
And those answers have to be for the record. We are now going to go to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Finstead.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Throughout your testimony and through your answers to my colleagues, we've heard about the approaches that the Department of Defense is taking to ensure that we are delivering integrated capabilities to our, to our warfighters at speed and scale. And I applaud your efforts and steps you are taking to streamline our DoD acquisitions process and integrating more small businesses into our defense industrial base. The importance of a strong acquisition process has been made abundantly clear. Mr. Duffy, while the DoD's push for right to repair aims to improve sustainment, as you just talked about a little bit, to cut costs and boost readiness, I'm concerned it creates significant business, legal, and technical challenges, particularly for small businesses and non-traditional suppliers. The debate is difficult because intellectual property law is complex and nuanced, and that's why it's so important that we take a look at some of the proposals, because some of the proposals out there are really all or nothing. And that can be very problematic, as you well know. So to address this, I offered an amendment during the consideration of the 26 NDAA, and it requires the DoD to assess what IP and technical data is needed, what it has, and what it's missing. This is a more targeted approach, and it ensures DoD only asks for what's necessary, allowing industry to respond with solutions that provide necessary protections on privately funded IP. A strong and innovative industrial base is critical to national security. So, Mr. Duffy, will you commit to working with this committee to craft a balanced policy, one that meets your sustainment needs without undermining commercial innovation?
You have my commitment.
Perfect. I was hoping that'd be a quick answer. So I appreciate that commitment and look forward to working with you and the rest of the committee on this issue. Thank you again for all that you all do for us. Appreciate you being here today, and Mr. Chairman, I'll give you some time back. I yield back.
I like that. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony today. Acquisition reform remains a highly relevant topic today as DoD is faced with an increasingly contested environment across the Indo-Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East. The defense acquisition system needs to be more nimble than ever before to rise to meet these global challenges. My first question pertains to the defense industrial base. Question, Under Secretary Duffy, what sectors within the defense industrial base do you currently assess as most fragile or high risk, and what data underpins those assessments?
Thank you for your question. I will confess I don't have a holistic view of where the fragility exists in the defense industrial base, but I'm committed to finding working with my team to holistically understand that, because I think that's critical to ensuring that we're allocating resources that Congress has appropriated, that we ensure that we understand where those greatest constraints and fragility exists. I can tell you that we are actively pursuing within the munitions sector solid rocket motors and looking at ways to expand the production capacity there. Certain microelectronic components can be a constraint. And we're also, because this is a kind of a crosscut, we see a lot of interesting innovative ideas come in areas such as additive manufacturing and opportunities to improve how we're doing castings and those sorts of things, particularly within munitions, but really across the board.
And Mr. Undersecretary, one of the greatest force multipliers the United States has is its extensive network of allies and partners across the globe. What are the department's plans to better integrate allied co-production or supply chain collaboration into the department's industrial base strategy?
Well, I think the President has pushed a very strong message of self-reliance, and part of that would be how do we assist our allies and partners with creating their own defense industrial base to supply their needs. So this is an area where I think we have a lot of thinking to do about how do we manage the complexity of technology exports, limited supply chains, workforce expertise, and partner with nations to share what we can without degrading our own operational readiness. And so within the department, I've got a partnership with Undersecretary of Defense Colby, who heads our policy office, and our international partnerships. And we're dedicated to really thinking through how do we get after this problem in a way that really benefits the department and the holistic collective defense.
Thank you for that. And like a few of my colleagues here, I'm also interested in the right to repair issues and its impacts on acquisition costs and flexibility. In an April 30th memo, Secretary Hegseth directed the Army to incorporate right to repair provisions in all its contracts. This is a massive undertaking that raises other questions about the ability of the Army acquisition workforce to negotiate these provisions in a timely fashion. But my question to you, Undersecretary Duffy, is how do you plan on supporting and executing the Secretary's intent in your acquisition process?
Well, I think that direction, as we've spoken about today, does maintain some flexibility on how do we pursue the data that is required to enable the sustainment of the system while still respecting the need to protect the intellectual property that's privately funded and is really an engine of the innovation that we are dependent upon. So I'm looking forward to working with my Army colleagues to understand how do we navigate that complex issue.
And if I may, my final question, do you plan on excluding commercial items from right to repair? And if so, how do you see the impact, this impacting forward deployed forces?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't think we've thought that, at least I haven't thought that through sufficiently enough to understand, but I'll just repeat the thought that I want to make sure that we're taking a balanced approach where we're respecting the intellectual property rights with the need for us to have access to information.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Any gentlemen, anything to add?
Sir, so from the Army perspective, I would just say that we're still in the process right now of trying to develop what that strategy is going to be. I would tell you that we've already leaned forward and we're essentially surveying the force and the fleet to try to get feedback to understand exactly where a right to repair issue has come up. And then it's a matter of looking at how do we then fix that with existing contracts, and then moving forward, what is the appropriate level of access that we're going to have with new systems. So more to follow on that.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing back. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yeah, I think dealing with it prospectively is a little easier than dealing with existing technologies, but it's your job. I'm sure you'll figure it out. We'll go to the gentleman from Guam, Mr. Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the representative for Guam, I know firsthand how delays in defense acquisitions hurts readiness on the front lines of the Indo-Pacific. And Guam is vital to our national security, but outdated process and supply chain gaps too often leave us waiting. Reforming the system isn't just about speed, it's about making sure capabilities reach forward deployed locations like Guam, where and when they are needed. That means cutting red tape, expanding opportunities for local contractors, and treating our island as a logistical hub that it is. So first question, Undersecretary, please. Now, Guam and other U.S. territories often face unique barriers when competing for defense contracts, including distance from decision makers and lack of streamlined acquisition pathways. How is the department ensuring that territories like Guam are not left behind as we modernize the defense industry base?
Congressman, thank you for your question, and I'd be happy to work with you and your team to think that through. That we are making, and I'm the milestone decision authority for the Defense of Guam system, which is making a significant investment in the island, and to the extent that it would make sense, that seems like a great opportunity to create partnership there. So I'd be happy to work with you and your team to ensure that we're taking full advantage of that.
Appreciate that, and you got to come and visit as well. Okay. Next question is goes for any one of the witnesses, please. Now, small business, especially in geographically isolated regions, face disproportionate administrative burdens in navigating DFARS and FAR regulations. How will the SPEED Act and EO implementation reduce the compliance burden and expand access to local territorial vendors?
Well, I can speak to that. We do have, thanks to the executive orders from the White House, a committed effort to examining and streamlining the FAR and DFARS, and I expect that would apply to all businesses in territories and CONUS. That'll be an aggressive effort and part of our overall acquisition reform strategy to find ways to ease the pathway for businesses to compete for contracts.
Excellent. And last question for the doctor and Mr. Bailey. With Guam's forward posture in the Indo-Pacific, even minor acquisitions delay can ripple into major readiness shortfalls. Now, what specific reforms are being pursued to ensure rapid contracting, sustainment, and delivery capabilities to the forward locations like Guam are available.
Thank you for the focus on that kind of issue. If you take a look, especially with the theme coming out of the Speed Act on the focus on the acquisition workforce, our contracting community has spent quite a bit of time on their culture and the climate that they profess, right? So they are mission-focused business leaders out there to get out to those locations, to see what's going on and figure out how to bring their expertise to bear, and all the tools that we talk about here, OTs for small business enablement, looking at flexible contracting strategies, open architectures, all to provide them the best solutions possible.
All right, thank you very much, and Undersecretary, I appreciate you, and we'll be making contact and be sure to get you over to Guam as a visit as well. Thank you.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. As you can tell from today, acquisition reform is our overwhelming focus this year. It's not only bipartisan, it's bicameral, and we want to work with the department, and I take you at your pledge yesterday on our telephone call and your comments today that going forward we're going to have much better communication because we're on the same team. We're not adversaries. We're trying to all get us to the same place. So I'm optimistic, and I thank you for your testimony, your participation today, and I'll yield to my friend, the ranking member, for any closing comments he may have.
I agree with everything the chairman just said. So thank you for having the hearing. Yield back.
We're adjourned.